read.
All right, folks, I'm going to call the meeting to order. As required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a decision on these applications. And to start things off, I will introduce a committee. Now, please be patient with me because we've got people that are, some are here, some aren't here. So anyway, I'm Mr. Robertson, and we've got Mr. Marsh here, Ms. Archer here, Mr. Strangway here, and Ms. Robinson here. And electronically, we have Ms. Richardson and Councillor Yeo, although I haven't seen Councillor Yeo on there yet, but I will take it for granted he is. All right. And staff in person here, we have Ms. Berry, the Manager of Planning. We have Mark Leahy, he's our Secretary-Treasurer. And it looks like maybe our recording secretary today as well, wearing two hats. And we have Mr. Harding, Planner 2, over there. Very good. And via electronic participation, we've got our Chief Building Official, Ms. Murchison. Oh, and I see at the bottom, actually, our recording secretary, Ms. Crockford, is on electronic as well. So welcome, everyone. I hope I didn't miss anyone. All right. Are there any comments or questions with respect to the agenda? And can I get a motion to put the Mr. Strangway, Ms. Archer? All right. Any further comments or questions on the agenda? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? I still don't see, Kathy, I don't see Councillor Yeo. Is he actually on? Or, oh, he's not? Okay. All right. Are there any comments or questions with respect to the minutes of the previous meeting? All right. Being none, can I get that on the table? A motion to approve the minutes as printed. Mr. Marsh? Ms. Archer? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. For the benefit of everyone, the committee will hear comments, gather information, and may ask questions to clarify statements made. The committee may ask and answer questions or redirect questions to the appropriate person. Please note that any information or comments given to the committee during this meeting, they are considered evidence. We will first hear from staff, then the applicant or his or her agent. We will then hear from any person in support of or from those who have questions, concerns, or are opposed to the application. And then finally, the applicant or his or her agent will have an opportunity to respond to any of the statements made to the committee. We afford anyone that's wishing to speak 10 minutes. I don't think anyone has ever taken that long, but you are afforded the 10 minutes. And if you find you can't possibly get all of your presentation in within those 10 minutes, then I will ask the committee if they would consider adding a couple of minutes to the presentation. I don't think that's ever happened, but we do afford you that latitude. All right. And when you come on the screen, I would appreciate it if you would give us your name. I know there's a name comes up there, but it isn't always the person that's speaking. Sometimes it's different. So please give us your name, and then we'll let you speak to the presentation. Having said all that, we will now move to file number D20-2022-004, and this is 43 Chemongview Street, Geographic Township of Emily. And Mr. Harding, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. All right, just a brief aside to say that I'm thankful to have worked with you all of these 8.5 years, and I'm proud to be in here in person to present to you this final time before I move on to the City of Vaughan. So this application committee proposes to construct a new dwelling with covered and uncovered decks by reducing the water setback provisions. The property, as you can see on the slide, is the last residential lot along a private road known as Chemongview Street. The residential lots are on the south side of the street and abut Lancaster Bay, also known as Chemong Lake, in its entirety, and to the north and west sides is a larger rural residential lot, and then further west we have another shoreline residential neighborhood. So we have the aerial photography there for your review as well. This application meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So the subject property contains a small dwelling that's about 10.6 meters from the shoreline. It is in the lower right corner or southeastern corner of the property today. It is proposed to be replaced by a larger dwelling sited closer to the road. The dwelling's proposed 27.9 meters from the shoreline and the deck's 23.7 meters. And we have the elevations for your review here. So it is a single story with walkout basement. And then we'll get into the site photographs here. So the image on the left is me looking at Chemung Street looking west. So the subject property is actually the lawn that's on the left side of the vehicles there. And then the image on the right is me kind of walking in between those vehicles so that I'm now sitting or standing at the front lot line looking south towards the lake, and we can see the small existing cottage kind of to the center left of that photograph on the right. In these 2 images, I've walked down to the shoreline and I'm looking back north and northeast on the property. So the slide on the left is me standing right at the shoreline looking back out towards the road. You can see the cars parked in the center back section of the photograph there, with the existing residence on the extreme right of that photograph. And then the photograph on the right, I've just kind of panned to look east along the shoreline. So you see a component of the existing shoreline dwelling on the left side of that photograph, and then the other built forms further along to the east there. And then this set of photographs here, we've got the one on the left is me standing towards the eastern side of the shoreline, where the eastern side of the side lot line where it abuts the shoreline. So I'm looking west across the shoreline frontage. So you can see the existing cottage on the right side of that photograph. You can see the trees where that rural lot ties in with its shoreline access. That's the forest there. And then you can see the residential community beyond those trees. And then the image on the right is me standing more central to the lot, looking to the east at the other residence that's to the immediate east along Chemung View there. So we can see the cottage on the subject property that is to be demolished on the right side of that photograph. And we can get a general sense of where the new dwelling is going to go. It's going to be about in line with that dwelling, that reddish type dwelling on the property to the east there. All right, so with that in mind, I will back up to this photograph here. So the increased water setback will allow for increased buffer between the built form and the shoreline. This buffer provides additional distance for more intensive residential activity and the water, and also provides additional space for stormwater attenuation and the establishment of natural vegetation to improve shoreline and water health. The property is zoned limited service residential exception 4 zone, which permits vacation dwellings. This new dwelling will comply with the minimum gross floor area requirement for dwellings within the LSR 4 zone. And the decks on the rear of the dwelling are also anticipated to keep more of the outdoor activities that are more intensive in nature closer to the dwelling, so that all of that remaining rear yard space between the decks and the shoreline will be left more in a natural state and will not be subject to a more intensive use. The stairs to provide access between the main level of the dwelling and the rear yard is also proposed to be wrapped around to the eastern side of the dwelling rather than projecting further into that shoreline setback. The property is within the waterfront designation, which permits low-density residential uses. A single detached dwelling is one of the uses permitted within that designation, and we're contemplating the replacement of a single detached dwelling use in this case. Since the writing of this report, a letter of concern has been submitted by Charlotte Mustard, who is the owner of the abutting rural lot to the north and west of this parcel, and her concerns were with respect to compliance with the water setback. This has been provided to you in your amended agenda package. So staff have reviewed the letter and have determined in this case that those comments do not affect the recommendation. The proposed water setback being contemplated in this report is a substantial improvement over the existing built form. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Are there any questions of the planner? All right. None. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Yes, this is Dennis Jenkins here.
Go ahead,
And
Dennis.
I just want to add, Mr. Harding, that there was another item on the docket for a setback for the filter bed from the high water mark of 15.22 meters. That was not included in the application here that's
All
being
right.
presented.
Let's have Mr. Harding respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there was a reason for that, and it has to do with the fact that the zoning bylaw does not regulate the placement of sewage system infrastructure, only the built form that is above ground.
Okay, so the septic doesn't need to meet the 30-meter setback from the high water mark in this case?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Further questions, sir?
Nope, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
I see another gentleman there. Did you wish to speak to it, sir?
No, I'm good. I let Dennis handle everything for me. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions of the applicant by committee members? All right, being none. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Committee. And whose hand did I see there? Ms. Robinson? All right. Okay, seconded by Ms. Robinson. All right. Are there any further comments or questions on the motion on the floor? All those in favor? And that carries. All right, moving right along. We're dealing with file D20-2022-014, and this is 4 Alfred Street and 42 Silver Birch Street, Geographic Township of Verlam. And again, Mr. Harding, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application proposes to permit the construction of a new dwelling by reducing the street centerline setbacks. The subject property is a double-wide corner lot in the shoreline community of Greenhurst, Thurstonia. There is an existing dwelling on the west side of the property, which you can see in the aerial photograph slide. This dwelling is to be demolished and replaced by a new dwelling on the east side. And we can see that conceptual replacement sketch on the slide now. So the dwelling will be on the east, the tile bed serving it will be on the west side. Staff is of the opinion that the proposal meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So this community is unique in the sense that the lots are modestly sized to support private services, and most of these lots are in the vicinity of around 590 square meters, which is quite small for a privately serviced lot, and the roads are quite narrow as well, being just over 6 meters wide in this area. So given the lot and road fabric of the community in this area, the built form has developed very close to the lot lines. The proposed built form will propose similar setbacks or greater setbacks to those established by other dwellings in the area. So looking at the photograph right on the slides, currently we've got Alfred Street and Silver Birch, so we can see the subject property on the image on the left behind the Alfred Street text there, so the existing dwelling is kind of that bluish 1.5-story dwelling there. The image on the right is me walking a little bit down Alfred Street, looking pretty much across the eastern lot that is currently vacant that will contain the dwelling. You can just see a tiny bit of the existing blue cottage to be demolished on the left side of that photograph on the right. The image on the left is me standing at the intersection of Silver Birch and Alfred. So the subject property is on the right side of that photograph. We can see the cottage to be demolished kind of behind the trees there, and the existing built form that's on the south side of the property is on the left side of that photograph. The image on the right is me basically pivoting at that same intersection. So I'm looking more north now, so that lawn area on the left-hand side of the right photograph is the subject property. For the next slides that we have here, the image on the left is me standing kind of towards the north side of the property looking south. So the property to be developed is the lawn on the right-hand side there. The cottage to be demolished is on the further right component. And then we have the existing built form that borders Alfred Street kind of in the center back of that photograph. And then the image on the right is me standing a little bit further down Alfred Street looking back towards the property. So the cottage to be demolished has been identified by a blue arrow there. So again, we can see that the built form is quite close to the road where it exists. So the dwelling's placement is going to allow for the construction of a new sewage system. The sewage system footprint is constrained by the locations of other wells in the area due to the limited lot sizes that exist to place wells for other properties. The dwelling location also provides the greatest depth for rear yard amenity space, minimizing the depth of a more visible and public front-facing front yard and flankage yard, since this is a corner lot. This property is within the residential 1 zone of the Verlam zoning bylaw. The built form does comply with the R1 zone requirements. It is specifically the street centerline provisions within the general provisions section which are not being met. So the premise of the street centerline setback was likely to provide additional spatial separation between the road and built form where a road allowance was unusually narrow. This would make it easier for the municipality to widen said road allowance at a future date, should it choose to do so, because there would not be building obstacles in the way in order to carry out that function. Local roads would typically be about 20 meters wide, but the roads abutting this property are just over 6. And these roads abutting the property would be considered local roads, which is why we have the non-compliance issue with the street centerline setback. However, that being said, based on what I'm seeing on my neighborhood walk here, the lot and road fabric of the community has really resulted in built form being much closer to the road and well within the street centerline setback. It is unlikely that road widenings would be pursued due to the proximity of built form to the road allowance today, as this would also cause not only complications in widening that road, but also further reducing available lot area for these existing properties to support and place their private services. The property is within the waterfront designation, which does permit low-density residential uses, and a new single-detached dwelling is proposed, being a low-density residential use. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the planner?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We can definitely defer that question to the chief building official, but my experience has been that it's not necessary, considering that the existing dwelling is occupying the proposed sewage system footprint.
All right. Do we have the chief building official on? She does. All right. Do you want to repeat that question, Jan? Maybe you could. Was your mic on? Yeah. There's a button there somewhere. Good.
So the question was, does there need to be a condition requiring demolition of the existing cottage, or is that dealt with through the permit process? And the reason why I asked that, first of all, it's a double lot, and second of all, like I see where the sewage system is proposed, but you know, that could be shifted. It wouldn't be impossible to shift it, so that's my question.
Okay, through the chair, the rebuilding of a cottage or a dwelling on a lot that has an existing structure requires the applicant to address at building permit stage what they're going to do with that existing dwelling. So they have options. Obviously, they can apply for a demolition permit, and then they work part and parcel as you go through the build. Once if they're not superimposed on top of each other, once the occupancy is granted on the new dwelling, then we give the applicant 30 days to remove the old dwelling. If they choose to be able to repurpose it into a different use, they would, again, before they get their dwelling permit for the new dwelling, they would need to apply for a change of use permit to change it into a permitted use. So it would all be taken care of through the building permit process. I don't think you need a condition here.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Archer, go ahead.
Through, please, to Mr. Harding. Is there any requirement to consolidate the two lots, seeing as there are lots on plans?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I actually did some research on this one, and we have, it's contained in the background of the report, but it basically, the township in the early 90s went through and imposed deeming bylaws over most of that community. So these lots have consolidated since title between two now matches.
Anything further from committee? Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Sorry.
And your name, sir, is?
My name for the record is Kevin, middle initial M, surname Duguay. I am the planning consultant for the property owner. I have reviewed the Mr. Harding's report with the property owner and the builder. We are in agreement with the conclusions. It's also my professional opinion that the application satisfies the 4 tests prescribed by Section 45(1) of the Planning Act. The earlier inquiry with respect to the disposition of the existing cottage, it is to be demolished because that building, which in fact sits closer to the Alfred Street street line than the proposed building, would interfere with the proposed and required new septic system. So the existing dwelling would be demolished, a new dwelling would be constructed, and associated with that would be a new septic system. And I also acknowledge and agree with Mr. Harding's conclusions with respect to the disposition of lots in the previous deeming bylaws that were undertaken by the municipality. I make myself available, Mr. Chairman, committee members, in the event there are any questions, but in conclusion, we support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Are there any questions of the deputy? All right, being none. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Committee, Mr. Strangway.
As printed.
Okay, moved by Mr. Strangway and seconded by Ms. Archer. Any further comments or questions with respect to the motion on the floor? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Your application is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Thank you.
And Mr. Harding. Bye for now.
All right, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-020, and this is 50 Riverbend Drive, Geographic Township of Somerville. And Mr. Harding, go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application proposes to reduce the side yard setback to the west lot line in order to facilitate the construction of a new single detached dwelling. The subject property is a vacant lot in a shoreline residential area east of the hamlet of the Burnt River, but on the west side of the Burnt River. There is a dwelling, or there was a dwelling, which you can see on the aerial photograph before you, but that has since been demolished in preparation for the redevelopment of the lot. So specifically, it is the west side lot line setback that for which relief is being sought. So this application meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So the subject property, as we can see by this survey here, is quite narrow. It's actually one of the 2 most narrow properties along Riverbend Drive. So I'll just back up to this lot fabric image so that you can see that. So it has a twin, which is the lot to the west of it. So these are the tiniest lots on Riverbend Drive. The lot frontage is about 7.6 meters and the rear lot line is about 16 meters. So this resulting taper of the lot makes it very difficult to site a rectangular shaped dwelling in full compliance with the side yard setback provisions. So the variance will allow for the creation of a more typical floor plan by allowing for a rectangular footprint. And the type of dwelling being proposed is on the slide now. So this is basically a 1.5-story dwelling. It's quite modest. The second floor will not be visible from the abutting side properties because that second story is tucked entirely within the gable. So it's only going to be visible from the north and south sides. And an image of the side profile of the dwelling is on the screen now. So the lot is within a limited service residential zone, which permits residential uses. And as we can see in the photographs here now, the image on the left shows the narrow frontage of the subject property. So we've got that teal arrow there pointing towards the lot, which is kind of in between those row of cedar trees. Image on the right is me panning a little bit to the west, looking down towards where Riverbend Drive ties in with the rest of the Village Road network, or Hamlet Road network rather. And then we have pictures of the side yard setback as viewed from the rear yard being close to the water. So this is the western side of the interior side yard that we're looking at now. So the house that you see in both these images is actually number 48, being the lot to the west. So a function of the side yard is to facilitate access between the front and rear yards to maintain the private services that might exist in either one of these yards. So in this case, the sewage system is proposed within the front yard, so we don't need to worry about getting larger vehicles squeezed in between the house to service a sewage system in the backyard, since that's not where it's being proposed. And also there is no well that is proposed for this property. It's going to be a draw from the river directly. So there's no need to provide additional room for vehicles to service that well in the future. Also, vehicles are proposed to be parked in the front yard in front of the sewage system, so we don't need that waterside yard in order to accommodate vehicles parking beside the dwelling. That being said, at 2.6 meters, this side yard is still quite generous and is sufficiently sized in order to carry out maintenance on that side of the building and also to provide for the passage of larger items between the front and the rear yards, such as kayaks. The property is designated environmental protection within the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan due to its proximity to the Burnt River. While the EP designation does not permit new uses, it does allow for the continuation of existing uses where they are zoned appropriately. So this lot does have LSR zoning, and it also has a floodplain symbol, which imposes additional floodproofing measures due to the proximity of the Burnt River. Since the writing of the report, comments have been received from the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority, and they have no objections to this application. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the planner? Ms. Archer?
Through you, please, to Mr. Harding. In the Appendix C in the survey, the sketch, there seems to be a covered deck down close to the water. There's no concerns with it being too close to any of the lot lines?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is a existing pole type structure. I did actually meet the property owner on site and did identify that I believe this building does not comply with the zoning bylaw, so they are aware of that non-compliance.
Typically, we make them clean things up at this stage, so we're not going to this time?
Actually, I would like to confer with the manager of planning briefly, if I may.
Go for that. While they're doing that, I would advise the committee that, my error, because we've got one person on electronics, I got to go through the in favor process. Okay, so just so you know. My error. I thought we almost had everyone here. Of course, Sandra had to, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing that deliberation to take place. So the reason why it was not put forward as a condition is specifically because we are dealing with a side yard setback for a dwelling. So it's beyond the reliefs being reviewed by the committee at this point in time. So if committee were to include it as a condition, there's the potential that it could be contested since it's not directly tied to the relief being sought. So that being said, we can definitely have a conversation with the owner if they're online to see if they're agreeable to having a voluntary condition added to that effect, but it would have to be at their consent.
Lead that to Ms. Archer then if the applicant does speak.
No, I think I'm okay with that. It was just, normally we do try to clean things up at this stage, so I was just checking to make sure you hadn't missed something on your last day.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
He says never would that happen yet. Further from committee? Ms. Richardson, go ahead.
Through you, I'm wondering if we should be including the course of conservation comments as a condition. They're saying that they need an amended floodplain elevation and associated drawings.
Actually, good question, because I put a little star on that myself. There's a number of situations they've identified here. Is it part of the building process, or, as Ms. Richardson said, should we be more concerned about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think ultimately I will delegate a component of the response to this to the manager of planning and the chief building official, but it's my understanding that since we're only dealing with proximity of built form to the side lot line rather than the existence of the building itself, we can't build in these additional flood-proofing requirements because it's above and beyond what the zoning bylaw already requires for that building to exist.
Ms. Berry, do you wish to speak to it?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Regarding the piece on the construction and its requirements, I definitely would defer to our CBO. If there's anything related to the zoning thereafter, happy to weigh in. Okay.
Ms. Murchison, have you've heard what the question was?
Yep, through the chair. In this instance, this is not regulated by the Conservation Authority, so it's not applicable law to the building permit. So there's no way for us to tie the conservation comments unless they're tied through a planning application.
Okay, just doesn't feel like the loop's been closed, but Ms. Richardson, did you have a further comment or question?
Oh, that's fine, thank you.
All right, so again, just I guess with the chief building official, so I guess why do we ask them if we have no authority or jurisdiction with respect to, because these seem like reasonable recommendations, but we've chosen to ignore them. So is there any insurance that this will actually be done as a result of this building being built?
So through you, Mr. Chair, not to pass the buck again, but I need to defer back to the manager of planning because I believe it's a memorandum of understanding or something to that effect that we have the Conservation Authority comment on all planning applications. But if it's not tied through that approval to my building permit, it's not a regulated property in their jurisdiction. So my applicable law clause in my Building Code Act will not tie my process to getting comments from the Conservation Authority further to the ones that have already been provided, and they're not tying it to my building permit yet.
All right, thank you. Barry?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Maybe just a couple of thoughts. And I'll clarify that we circulate only those applications of note or relevance if there's a trigger for them to the Conservation Authority. So we are mindful of the reasons why we circulate to them, both in connection with areas that their legislation governs that is within the regulated areas, or because of other natural heritage features under provincial policy. Okay, so that piece aside, it is certainly the case on occasion that the Conservation Authority will provide, for the benefit of staff, for the benefit of the owner in particular, for their consultants, for their builders, it's an opportunity to educate them and to provide examples of best practices and to be mindful of various elements when going through their building plans. Not necessarily their building permit application, so just their approach to building and developing of their property. So I would review the comments through that lens.
Thanks to everyone for your input. And Ms. Richardson, you're comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
Anything further from committee? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And your name, sir?
I'm Mr. Justin Thorburn, and I don't have anything else to say there. A couple of things that were touched on as far as the covered porch on the property line, it is planned to be taken down. And as far as our elevation to fit within the Burnt River and floodplain, we do have the site plan all set to rise that up. So I appreciate your guys' time.
All right, and thank you for that. Any questions of the applicant? All right, being none, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Committee. Ms. Robinson, do I see a seconder? Okay, moved by Ms. Robinson, seconded by Mr. Marsh. Any further comments or questions on the motion on the floor? All those in favor? And that, oh, I did it again, didn't I? Let's get back here. All right. Robinson, in favor or opposed? Mr. Marsh? Ms. Archer? Mr. Strangway?
In favor.
Ms. Richardson?
In favor?
And I'm in favor. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. We'll get this right yet. All right. We're now dealing with file number D20-2022-021, and this is 31 Logie Street, former town of Lindsay. And again, Mr. Harding, busy fellow today.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I wanted to make sure that I could get as many applications through as possible.
That's extremely commendable.
So this particular application, being 405 that I'm taking through today, proposes to facilitate the construction of a single detached dwelling by permitting a reduced front yard for part of its attached garage. So the subject property is along the west side of Logie Street on the east side of the Scugog River in a neighborhood that has a mix of lots which have developed in phases over many, many years. And as well, there's also vacant land that is awaiting development. The subject property is one of those parcels that is currently undergoing development. So this application meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So the portion of the dwelling that does not comply with the front yard setback is actually the part of the garage facing the road. So we can see here that there is a little bit of an offset. So it's a 3-car garage that is proposed arranged in a double door and single door configuration. The bump out is where the double door is proposed. And it's that specifically that does not comply with the setback requirement. So we can see the drawings here. So we can see that that offset actually allows for the creation of visual interest through architectural design by introducing not only multiple wall faces along what would otherwise be a very long garage face, but also creating more gables and more interesting roof designs in response to that offset in the wall, which is anticipated to add character to the streetscape. All right, so here we have the picture of the dwelling under construction. Two head-on photographs rather. The one on the right is basically just panned a little bit more so that you can capture a bit of the dwelling that's beside it on the north side. And then the image on the right is actually me walking much further down the road, looking back towards the property. So there's kind of like a large tree that's in the center left of that photograph. So you can see a lower roof line there a little bit. So that's the dwelling. And then there's kind of like I'll see if I can use my cursor or this highlighter. Okay, so the subject property, the dwelling on the subject property is here. And then the dwelling to the immediate north of it is showing through the trees here. So the image on the left is me just pivoting at that same vantage point, looking more south and west at the other developed lots along the west side of Logie. So in this particular case, we can see that those lots on the south side of the developed part of Logie are separated from the subject property by a vacant forested parcel. And because of the curvature of Logie, all of the lots on the west side of Logie are kind of terraced or stepped back from one another. And we can kind of see that terracing or stepping back on that image on the left. And this photograph is showing a vantage point on the north side of Logie Street looking south towards the subject property. So we can see there's two built forms there. So we have the subject property built form that's on the left center side, and then the property that's just to the north of it, which is a much older home that was built in the late 1800s, which is kind of more center right. So keeping the dwelling close to the road is more desirable than pushing it a little bit further back into the lot, as the zoning for this property being R1S5, or Residential 1 Special 5, is specifically designed to keep development away from the rear lot line, because that is where the Scugog River is and the wetlands that abut said river. So by doing a little bit more of a reduction on the front yard side, we're just preserving as much setback as possible between those more sensitive environmental lands and built form. No adverse use impacts are anticipated through the reduction in the front yard, as sufficient space remains in the front yard between the front lot line and where the double door is to park a vehicle on private property. So the minimum requirement in Lindsay is 5.8 meters, and we are in excess of that. I think we're about 6.7, so definitely ample room to accommodate a larger vehicle on private property in front of those doors if the need arises. Because this is a storage use, by bringing it slightly closer to the road and all of the utilitarian impacts that a road use is attached to, we're not going to have any use impacts on the dwelling side because it's a storage use rather than habitable space. So no adverse impacts through land use conflict anticipated there. The property is designated residential within the Town of Lindsay official plan, which is the document in effect since the secondary plan for Lindsay is under appeal right now, and low-density uses, including single detached dwellings, are permitted within this designation, and a single detached dwelling is proposed. Since the writing of this report, comments have been received from the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority noting no concerns with the application. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Questions to the planner? Ms. Robinson, go ahead.
I have a question about looking at the photograph and the driveway, how wide it is on the right-hand side. Is that already paved?
Through the chair, yes, it is paved.
And is that width of driveway permitted in the bylaw? Is there restrictions about driveway widths? It looks like it extends quite a ways beyond the front of the garage.
Starting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there is a zone provision that I can look at if committee wishes. I might defer to the chief building official in the event that she has some additional information. This could have been reviewed through that process.
Well, let's try that. The chief building official online. Are you aware of the question, Ms. Murchison?
Yes, I am. I'm just actually trying to see if I can pull up the lot grading and drainage plan on my screen here. Normally, the standard answer that we would give an applicant for a building permit is that the driveway width should align with the width of the parking portion of the structure. So this may be wider than what was proposed originally. It's not something I can enforce through the building permit process, but it would be something that if it's raised as a concern, we would dialogue with our engineering staff to see if it's something that needs to be addressed due to it's usually a stormwater management type decision is made as to whether there's too much hard surface.
Follow up?
Well, I guess the question is there a zoning requirement or restriction on the width of specifically on the width of the driveway? Like, does that driveway comply with the zoning bylaw?
Ms. Murchison?
I would defer to the planner to determine whether it's compliant with the zoning bylaw. That's not my forte.
All right. Well, Mr. Harding, you heard the question.
Yes, I did, Mr. Chair. We're just looking at the general provisions of the Lindsay zoning bylaw. I do know that there is a provision. I just cannot recall what that provision says.
All right, take a minute.
It's really wide.
All right, Mr. Chair. So yes, we have confirmed that the bylaw specifically says driveways can be no smaller than 3 meters, but cannot exceed a width of 7.5 meters.
And we don't know what it is, I guess, at the bottom.
I
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Murchison.
Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, I've pulled up the lot grading and drainage plan, and actually based on what was originally submitted and approved by our engineering staff, the driveway is not in conformance with that plan right now. That plan indicated that there is, I think there's a portion of a swale that needs to be brought down in line with the garage. So there's possibly some modifications that we're going to have to ask them to do to comply with their lot grading and drainage plan.
Because it looks like it goes well beyond the, not only at the curb, but it goes well beyond the structure at the top as well.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the original plan that was submitted has the driveway coming forward in line with the wall of the garage and then actually narrowing as it reaches the street. So this does not look like it's following that plan.
So are you suggesting then that this is something that you'll deal with as this thing moves along?
Yes, I will.
Ms. Robinson, you're content
Well,
with it?
I think I would prefer to see it as a condition that they comply with because in this case, we're being asked to make a decision on variances. The driveway does not comply with the bylaw as constructed. I realize we're looking at an after-the-fact variance, which is, I know these things happen, but you know, even at the road, it's flaring out even wider, and we're hearing that there's drainage that should have been constructed, of the swale that should have been constructed. It's not being constructed, so anyway, that's just a comment.
All right, I'm going to go over to Ms. Berry. With these conditions, there's always been discussion around how enforceable is it, and so like, my question to you is, where are we on that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple thoughts. First, just connecting with the owner or their agent if they're online. It's one thing to include conditions of approval, if that is the committee's wish, that are unrelated to the variance being applied for if the owner is agreeable. That's number one. Number two, if the owners are interested, then the agreement could be, or the condition could be to cut back the driveway in accordance with the bylaw. But keeping in mind, of course, that's outside of what's being sought through the variance. And the third way to look at this or approach is to defer, to give an opportunity to revise the application and re-advertise, to give this committee an opportunity to hear the evaluation of the merits of the relief that would be needed for whatever the extended amount of driveway is beyond 7.5.
All right, and that's why I asked, because we got to be careful with that. So is Ms. Murchison, are you still online? All right, you heard what the manager of planning said. I guess it's being considered that perhaps as a part of the application process, a condition be added here, but we're being told that the only way that we could add the condition if in fact there was consent by the applicant. So I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that. Where are you, maybe you could explain to us, if it's going to be part of the building process, permit process, how can the committee be assured that, in fact, that matter will be addressed?
So through you, Mr. Chair, anytime a applicant for a building permit submits a lot grading drainage plan for our process, this is obviously the exercise we're going through today is proving that our process works. We have a foundation check that happens at foundation installation time of the building permit, and if the setbacks are incorrect, that's where they're flagged, and then we halt construction until an application for a variance is filed. And then the next step to do another check is at occupancy. And so if at occupancy the inspector goes out and the lot grading and drainage visually, any components on that lot grading and drainage plan visually do not match what that plan appears to be asking for, then we ask for an as constructed plan at that point. And we would then ask them to comply, resubmit. If they resubmit with the as constructed driveway we're seeing today in these photographs, that would be recirculated through our engineering staff. They would have a chance at that point to comment and say yes or no to the extended width. And then if it's a zoning issue, we would also then have to put it through for a variance if it's not compliant with the zoning. So it's probably easier if you take one of the other two options I think I've heard, where it's either a voluntary condition with the applicant to cut this driveway back and through a condition on the variance, or whether they defer and add it as a second piece of variance to ask for.
All right, thank you for that. Then perhaps what we'll do, Ms. Robinson, is wait until we get the applicant on and we'll see where he's with it. Mr. Marsh, did I see your hand? Are there any further questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Tom. Hi, yes. This is Vanessa from TD Consulting.
Now your name is?
Vanessa Archer from TD Consulting.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Could I just ask for one quick second to answer the question of the deferral or the variance condition?
If you wish, yes.
Sorry, just one quick moment. Hi, sorry about that. Can everybody hear me again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So we would like to do this driveway concern as a condition of the variance.
All right, thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anything further you wish to say with respect to the application?
I'm here for any other questions that you may have, but otherwise, that's it.
So it looks like, go ahead.
Ms. Archer, I just want to confirm that you're agreeing to a condition that is that the driveway would be brought into compliance with the grading and drainage plan and with the zoning bylaw. Is that what you're agreeing to?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think, that's what I heard. Are there any further questions of the applicant? Mr. Marsh? No, you're good? Okay. All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right. Perhaps, Ms. Robinson, I'll go to you then. Are you willing to make the motion with that added condition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move approval of the application as printed with the additional third condition that the driveway be revised to conform with the grading and drainage plan and to comply with the zoning bylaw.
All right, and just before I do that, does that sound like it's a complete, Ms. Berry, with respect to addressing the concerns around the driveway?
Mr. Chair, it does. I understand Mr. Harding may recommend, I would not dare to put words in his mouth, certainly not today, but may want to actually reference the zone provision if the committee thinks that's warranted.
Yeah, he may leave sooner if we're not careful, so yeah, I hear you. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that would be my recommendation, would be to further refine a reference to the zoning bylaw to pull out the specific provision that needs to be enforced. So that provision is 5.12, and then in brackets J, and then another set of brackets X or 10.
Robinson, you okay with that?
Yes, that amendment is agreeable for sure.
Question?
My concern, is 4 months then sufficient to do all that? Condition 3 is 4 months.
Yes. Well, I guess let's go to the applicant. Okay, I can't remember her name, but hello. Yeah. The question is, does 4 months give you enough time to address the concerns that are going to be related to this amended motion?
I don't want to speak on behalf of contractors that aren't involved, and knowing the timelines and busyness of those people, individuals, would we be able to ask for an extension to 6 months?
See Mr. Harding shaking his head yes, so that certainly does not sound unreasonable, so I'll see what the committee has to say. Ms. Robinson, 6 months?
That's fine with me.
All right. And who is the seconder on that? Oh, speak again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just see that the chief building officials has her hand up, so she might want to speak to that extension.
I've got so many faces and pictures going on here today, but go ahead, Ms. Merson. I apologize for not seeing you there.
That's fine. Through the chair, I don't have any issue with the extension being asked. I just caution that to the applicant that this will be a condition that prevents occupancy. So if you're looking at occupying 6 months down the road, then 6 months is fine. But if you think you're occupying in a month, the driveway has to be corrected before occupancy.
That was a chief building official speaking, so her word is kind of law around here. To the applicant, are you okay with that?
Yes, we'll leave it as it is, or with the 6 months, intending to get it done as soon as we can.
Well, nothing's written in stone, so if it is done earlier, then it can be brought back earlier. So that's kind of how it is here. So, okay. So you're okay with that then, to the deputant? Yep. All right. Ms. Robinson, you're okay with that? Mr. Marsh, you were the seconder? You're okay with it? All right. Any further comments or questions with respect to the amended motion on the floor? All right. Ms. Robinson, in favor or opposed? Mr. Marsh? All right. Ms. Richardson?
Favor.
Ms. Archer? Mr. Strangway?
In favor.
And I'm in favor. All right, that carries. Your application is approved with as amended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, we can handle just about anything here. All right, number 5, where are we? Okay, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-022, and this is 5 Homestead Road, Geographic Township of Manvers, and we've got that laborious fellow, Mr. Harding, back again. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, 5 of 5 applications now. So this one, I just want to point out a brief error in the hard copy circulation beforehand. It had to happen.
It had to happen on your very last one. Eh?
That's what happens when you take 5.
Is that Murphy's Law or Harding's Law?
Probably a bit of both, Mr. Chair. So it actually has to do with Appendix B. So in the original circulation that went out, Appendix B actually reflected 43 Chemung. So that has since been corrected to accurately reflect the air photography for the subject property. So this application, moving on, now that we've corrected that little error, proposes to construct an addition to a dwelling, so a portion of which is to contain a ARU. So this subject property is a corner lot on the eastern side of Pontypool in a subdivision that has a bit of an estate residential style and feel due to the rectangular shaped lots where there's a greater degree of spatial separation between dwellings, and also there are no sidewalks or curbs. So there's a lot going on in this application, so I'll try to delineate the different components of the addition. But basically, most of the addition is a single story, and then we do have a portion that will have a second story as well. So the existing dwelling, which is on the left side of this kind of C built form that you see on the overhead above, that is a back split. There is a component that is immediately abutting it. So I'm going to try and highlight it on the slide here. So it's a little piece that's to the immediate east of the existing built form, and I'll cut away to the side profile, which is this section here. So that's going to be an expansion of the living space of the dwelling. The existing backsplit dwelling is here. So we're having a little bit of expansion of living space of the existing dwelling. There is a detached garage right next to that. So the detached garage will then be linked to the house, to the existing house. And then we're also expanding the existing detached garage further east. So we're having more garage space primarily on the main floor with a smaller second story where a additional residential unit is proposed. There's a small portion of the garage addition on the main floor where the ARU will occupy, but that's basically just hallway to get access up to the second floor. So a lot going on, but basically it's an addition containing some storage space, some habitable space that's going to make the built form ultimately appear as more of a C shape. Okay, so with that out of the way, so the existing dwelling is situated to the south and west of the property. As we can see on the sketch here, the sewage system is located behind or to the north of the dwelling. So the existing dwelling is being expanded, so we're going to pick up that existing detached garage as part of this expansion and make it all one big attached building. So this expansion is happening to the east of the existing dwelling. A portion of that eastern expansion is going to project southwards to be in line with the front wall of the existing residence, but we're not going past that. The the eastern side yard is a flankage yard reduction that's being sought. This is what the built form is proposed to look like from that side. So we can see the ARU on the second level, which is stepped back from the built form on the south side, with most of that garage, all of the garage being on the main level. And then we'll get into the site photographs here. So the photograph on the the left-hand side, we'll start with the left, is me standing at the driveway access to the property looking north into the lot. So we've got the existing back split, which is kind of behind the truck that's parked there. We can see the existing detached garage, which is sitting kind of centered to the driveway behind the sedan. And then we have additional space that is behind the trailer that is parked to the right of the sedan. So the addition's going to intrude into that space as well. So I've denoted in a red line the approximate southern wall extension of this addition. So it's a little bit further back, closer to where that link with the existing dwelling is going to be, and then projecting a little bit more southwards where the expansion to that garage is proposed. The slide on the right-hand side is me standing at the intersection where Homestead Road goes to the north, which is the road you see kind of going up and away on the one side, and Homestead then wraps around and proceeds on an east-west axis, which is the road that you see kind of curving around to the left side of that photograph. So the subject property is right in the middle there. So we've got some vegetation, which is heavily obscuring the vehicles there right now. The vegetation is proposed to be retained. And we can see that that built form is also set back a fair way, not only from the lot lines, but from the traveled portion of the road. And then I'm moving along the section of Homestead Road that runs north-south. So the image on the left is me looking towards the subject property, so we can see that trailer again parked in the front yard, and kind of all of the other uses there, and the dwelling kind of front and center, kind of tucked in behind those trees and that trailer. And then the image on the right is me just pivoting at that same point looking north. So we have a whole bunch of actually side yards that face onto this section of Homestead. There's only one house that has a front yard that faces onto this portion of Homestead, which you can see on the right side of that photograph. And then these images here. So the image on the left is me standing on that north-south portion of Homestead looking southwest back towards the subject property, so we can see the existing house and the detached garage front and center in that photograph. And then the image on the right is me standing along the western portion of Homestead looking back northeast towards the subject property. So that house that's kind of center left is the subject property house. All right, so I'm going to back up to this shot because this is the best shot for me. So as I said before, the southernmost point of the addition is going to be in line with the existing built form. So we're going to be preserving the character that the built form establishes along the western segment of Homestead Road. The reduced flankage yard, being the yard that faces the north-south side of Homestead Road, continues to maintain, or will contain, about 7.1 meters of setback from that flankage lot line, which is still a sizable side yard. The property is zoned RR1, and a function of the flankage yard is to maintain sight lines and character as flankage yards often abut properties that have front yards. However, this segment of Homestead Road, as I went into a bit earlier, really doesn't have any front yards that face onto that north-south portion. There's really only the one, and it's across the road. Everything on the western side of that north-south segment is all kind of side yard facing development, so there isn't any sort of greater setback established for front yard presentation or needed for sight lines that would typically be attached to a front yard because of vehicles entering and exiting properties from the front lot line. So for this reason, bringing that built form a little bit closer to the north-south segment of Homestead Road is going to be okay because it's really functioning more as a side yard atmosphere anyway. With respect to the relief being sought for the ARU. So an ARU is permitted on a privately serviced lot provided it has an area of at least 4,000 square meters. So lots with less area are to be assessed on their own merits through the variance process to determine whether or not the lot could support that more intensive use. So in this case, the Building and Septic Division has reviewed the proposal and has determined that the lot is sufficiently sized to accommodate a new sewage system that would be required for the increased flow that an ARU would generate. The property is designated a rural settlement within the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan, Oak Ridge's policy area, and low-density residential uses are anticipated within this designation, and an expansion to a single detached dwelling is proposed. Staff respectfully recommends that this application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Are there any questions of the planner? Ms. Archer?
Please, to Mr. Harding, could you show on the pictures where the carport and the canopy are that are to be removed?
Absolutely. Let's see if I can find a couple here. So it was hard to take photographs that could capture everything just because of how big this property is. So the image on the left, you can see kind of a bit of a gray rectangular shape that's to the right of that trailer. So that is the car canopy that's going to be removed as part of this proposal. The car canopy is closer to the road than the proposed addition is to be. And then the carport, you can see a little bit on the image on the left. It's going to be a bit hard to see here. The carport is actually attached to the detached garage. It's this piece here. So that particular component of the detached garage, the owner tells me, was added at another time. So that will be removed and replaced with a much larger garage expansion.
So should it be part of a condition that the canopy be removed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if committee wishes to do that over an overabundance of caution, then I believe we can. That being said, the whole purpose of, or part of the purpose of this proposal is that canopy is not required anymore because there'll be larger garage space to replace it. And my discussion with the owner led to the conclusion that they were going to remove that canopy anyway. So it's really committee's discretion. I'm confident that canopy will no longer be necessary once the garage is constructed, but if committee does want to add a condition, I'm fine with that as well.
If the owner changed his mind and left it, there'd be no bylaw problems having too much building on the lot or anything?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it wouldn't be a lot coverage issue. We're definitely well below lot coverage. They might encounter problems with proximity to their sewage system, just because the system is going to be so large in that rear yard. So that's going to preclude placement of a building in a large portion of that rear yard.
If that were a problem because of the septic, then they would pick that up, right, that division?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it depends on the circumstance. These sorts of temporary buildings, to my knowledge, don't require a permit. So that's why I don't think that review necessarily would take place.
Anything further, the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Hello, I'm the applicant, Lori Hukin.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Regarding the canopy that you're concerned about, it has to be removed because part of the garage is going to overlap where that canopy is. There's no way to build this addition without removing that canopy.
All right. Thank you for that.
Does that answer that concern?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay.
And did you wish to speak further to the application?
No, unless you have any questions.
We'll see what the committee has here. Are there any questions of the committee to the applicant? Your lucky day.
Okay, I'll turn back off.
All right. All right, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Committee, Ms. Archer. All right, and do I have a seconder? Mr. Richardson, did I see your hand there as a seconder? All right, very good. Any further comments or questions? All right. Ms. Archer, in favor or opposed? In favor. All right, Ms. Richardson.
In favor.
All right. Mr. Strangway.
In favor.
Ms. Robinson. In favor. Mr. Marsh. And I'm in favor. The application is approved. And a job very well done, Mr. Harding. All right. We will be hearing from you, I'm sure, in a short bit. All right. Pretty hard act to follow there, Ms. Berry. So, all right, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-015, and this is 19 Royal Estate Drive, Geographic Township of Manners. Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You aren't kidding. So we're moving a whole 650 meters south of the Homestead Road property that we just looked at and taking us to 19 Royal Estate for the minor variance that I bring to you next. So 19 Royal Estate Drive, just south of bustling, beautiful downtown Pontypool. Characterized estate residential subdivision by, as you can see, larger lots, fairly consistently rectangular in shape. There's an aerial photo of 19 Estates Drive with the footprint from the proposed addition, which is the purpose of this application. And by permitting the reduced minimum side yard setback relief from 7.6 meters to 4.2 meters, the owners would be able to add this garage addition to the north side of their home. It's the only relief that is being sought, and after evaluating the application, I'm of the opinion that it complies and meets and satisfies the 4 tests of a variance. Overall size, just to provide some background to the committee, overall size of the proposed addition, not quite 96 square meters, about 7.9 by 11.5 meters. We are in the Oak Ridges Moraine area, so policy and zoning coverage from the Oak Ridges Moraine policy area from the official plan for the city and the Orm zoning bylaw 2005-133. So before I get into the details here, the evaluation, I'll give you a look at the detailed site plan prepared by the applicants. The area for the proposed addition circled in red. Quite a bit of detail on this site plan. The X marks the spot as far as vegetation goes. We see the existing structures and main dwelling, of course, location of the driveway, setbacks, area of septic, well, and a stripped down version so that we can focus our eye to the proposed addition to the home itself and its location just to the north of the existing driveway. Bird's eye view, again, circled in red, and the elevation. To give you an idea, there is already an existing attached garage with a wide single door, separated with the addition of a walk-through, a pass-through, covered, of course, covered and enclosed, into the added garage space, reflected by 2 separate doors. And I'll leave the imagery here on this photo. Of course, the home in question for the addition is to the right side of the photo, and the dotted red line indicates the approximate location and extent of the proposed addition. David Harding did a wonderful job describing the neighborhood. It is very much the same, just south of the Homestead Road property. I won't go into too many more details, but the sort of heavy vegetation that we see at the front lot line extends up the north side lot line and throughout the backyard. The yard between the street and the home, of course that being the front yard, is manicured. Of course, we do see the vegetative buffer, and that's going to play an important role when looking at screening from not only the road, but from the neighbor immediately to the west. That's number 14. Of course, the density of the vegetation along the north lot line is going to provide for, in my opinion, sufficient screening to the neighbor to the immediate north, and that's number 17. When looking at what constitutes minor, I take a look at what the proposed or potential anticipated impacts might be to the environmental features, to municipal function, and of course neighboring properties. And in this case, there are no environmental features of note, and therefore no negative impacts to consider. There's no impact on the function of the municipal right-of-way in this case, and the existing screening and the fact that no trees are anticipated to be removed provides for certainly mitigation of the proposed addition to the home to the north. In my opinion, it is a desirable and appropriate new use for this property, or additional use for this property. The family is in need of additional indoor storage. Certainly, in my opinion, it's the logical location for the additional garage space, given the location of the driveway, the fact that there's already an existing garage, and based on the floor plan of the home. There is a clearing, again, not necessitating the removal of trees. As mentioned at the outset, we are within the Oak Ridges Moraine area. The zoning, rural residential type 1, special 2, it's a mouthful, RR1-S2. Zone provisions typically, and certainly in this case, are there to establish and to help support and maintain the character of this neighborhood. We see that with the larger lot area requirements, the greater yard setbacks, and also the lesser lot coverage provisions. Another element that those zone provisions cover is to ensure that there's appropriate carrying capacity on the property to deal with the private servicing, private septic, private well. The garage will remain subordinate. The footprint of the dwelling, as it is, as we saw in the previous slides, the proposed footprint for the new garage is less than both in size and in height, and will remain subordinate in that degree. We certainly see trending throughout this neighborhood, and will continue as a result of this proposal, that it's the natural features, the landscape and vegetation in this neighborhood that dominate rather than the built form. And we're staying under the coverage in this area to ensure that that's the case. And with respect to the final test, the lands are designated rural settlement, and in that designation, residential uses are permitted as are accessory structures. And that wraps up the evaluation of the 4 tests. We circulated the application in accordance with the requirements of the Act. We haven't received any concerns or objections from the circulated members of the public, so everyone within 60 meters of the property, or from our commenting partners and external agencies. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I recommend approval of the variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions of the planner? Manager? Okay. Being none, is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And your name?
Hi, my name is Ashley Roca. I'm here to speak on behalf of my father, John Roca. I don't have anything else to add.
All right. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right. Being none, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Excuse me. Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Being none, committee moves as printed.
As printed.
And Ms. Robinson, seconder. All right. Any further comments or questions with respect to the motion on the floor? Mr. Strangway, in favor?
In favor.
All right. Ms. Robinson? In favor. Ms. Richardson?
In favor.
Ms. Archer? In favor. Mr. Marsh? In favor. And I'm in favor. The application is approved. All right. Moving right along now, we're dealing with a deferred application. And this is file number D20-2022-013. And this is 29 Odessa Road, Geographic Township of Verlem. And again, Ms. Berry, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the committee will recall, was an item that we deferred from the previous month's Committee of Adjustment meeting. We have concluded our evaluation at this point, received all outstanding comments, and I will present our evaluation and my recommendation for approval. So, 29 Odessa Road in Verulam is our location, is on the screen at the moment. What the application is proposing to do is to recognize the location of an above-ground swimming pool, to permit the construction of a new deck to be attached to the swimming pool, and to permit an addition to the dwelling. Now, on review of the building permit application for the new deck and the addition to the dwelling, the deficient setbacks and location of the pool were identified in the building division. And so we have since been working with our colleagues in the building division to prepare and present the report to you today. So as a result of the existing structures as well as what's proposed, it results in 6 reliefs being needed, and we can summarize those or categorize them like this. So first, the yard. The existing pool, and of course the deck, should it be permitted, both the pool is and deck would be located in exterior side and front yards, and those are not permitted locations for such structures. Secondly, setbacks. And we kind of categorize setbacks in this case into 2 buckets, one being from the center line of the roads, and the second being setbacks from the lot lines. So specifically, center line of County Road 36, as well as the center line from Odessa. We can see that we are bounded on 3 sides, actually, this property by municipal right-of-ways. So we'll be seeking relief from the 25-meter requirement from County Road 36 down to 18.3 meters. For the Odessa Road requirement, center line 20 meters down to 14.88 to Odessa. And as far as lot lines go, these are sort of the second part of the center line setbacks. We would be looking for relief from the exterior side yard setback from 10 meters to 3.3. And finally, the minimum front yard, that being reduced from the required 10 down to 4.88 from Odessa. And it is the east portion of Odessa as opposed to the south part of Odessa that is seeking relief in this case. Finally, the 6th relief is an increase in lot coverage from 10% up to 12.77% is what is being sought. And here we see the aerial of the property and the existing structures on the home, as well as the red blobs, if I can call them that. The larger of the 2, and the one sort of in the northeast corner of the property, would represent the location of the existing pool and the extent of the proposed deck. And the smaller red blob, more like a rectangle, on the rear part of the home, and that would be the new residential addition. All right, so we've got the OLS sketch here, again, just giving us an idea of, without the benefit of the aerial photography, what the site looks like when all we see is the existing structures. Very lightly, and I trust still identifiable, is a circular driveway coming off the east portion of Odessa. There's a small driveway located on the south portion of Odessa as well. So we'll flip back and forth here just for a second. Aerial, approximate location, pool, deck, and addition to the rear of the home, as we see here. All right, a couple of images give us an idea. It's the back of the home where this small addition is proposed. So we have both an elevation as well as the site plan for what is proposed specifically to the addition. Images from the appendix to the report outlining some of the details associated with the deck construction. And some photos, and perhaps I will leave the images here for a moment as we go through some of the evaluation for the report, and we'll take a look at a few more photos in a moment. We're just east of Kenstone Beach Road, southwest of Bobcaygeon. We are amidst the predominantly rural neighborhood in this case, hobby farms, larger agricultural operations, and rural residential uses as well. As we saw in the previous slides, we're dealing with a corner lot here, for all intents and purposes, with primary access to Odessa. Again, looking at environmental features first, municipal functions, and neighboring properties. Key to this application, given the location of the pool in particular, and the proposed decking around the pool, seeing as that it's sort of at the juncture of two municipal rights-of-way, important to review the impact, if any, to the function, the operations associated with the municipal rights-of-way. There are no anticipated impacts on the function with respect to either access, drainage, or the maintenance of the right-of-way in this case. Again, no impacts to environmental features. The site is outside of any known natural hazards, not within 120 meters of any known key hydrological or natural heritage features of significance. It is outside of the Conservation Authority's regulated areas. And lastly, it's not located in a vulnerable area. In accordance with the revised Trent Source Water Protection Plan, this is an example of an application that wouldn't be circulated to the Conservation Authority given those circumstances. We don't anticipate that either of the proposed new structures or what we have been sort of told anecdotally from the existing structure of the pool, any negative impacts on the surrounding neighbors to date. All right, when looking at the desirability and appropriateness of the location, we do, of course, have the benefit of seeing where the pool is and not just having to visualize what it may be. Certainly having a pool in one's yard enables them to maximize the use and enjoyment of the property. This is something that the pool already has been doing since it was sited and permitted in 2020, in the summer of 2020. The yard space, it is technically by the zoning standards a exterior yard and a front yard where that pool is located. Functionally, though, it operates very much like the rear yard of a property would, given it is behind the home, and the home has its rear access to the yard there. Now, couple pieces about the pool in particular certainly warranted when evaluating the merits of whether that pool should continue to be permitted to stay in its current location. At the time that the building permit for that structure was being reviewed, it was understood to comply with the zone provisions in place. The location itself on the site plan, when it was being evaluated by the owners in particular, really was deemed the most suitable and appropriate location on the lot, given the lot's topography, given the presence of all the buildings and structures, the primary home, the garage, the shed, and also, and quite important, to ensure the necessary clearances between the septic field and the private well, which service the property. Our supervisor of Part 8 septic has also indicated that to accommodate the sewage system for sizing requirements, that it would be needed to be placed between the existing dwelling and detached garage. So there were significant constraints to siting the pool in another area, which made sense and was logical given also the understanding of the zoning provisions at the time. So a few words on the lot overall. In terms of vegetation, and we can see it's what is there is quite hardy. It survives in all seasons. Maple spruces, and recently on the right we see a screen of Brandon cedars have been planted adjacent to the County Road 36 right-of-way. So again, just for context, the images are taken from the intersection of Odessa to the east and the County Road 36 juncture. Those cedars were chosen by the owners because they are known to be a hardy species and are considered a suitable selection for a privacy hedge, and when grown to maturity, appropriate windbreak. So all good reasons to plant the trees. And I'll just spend a second to indicate the red features on the two images to the best we could, identifying the same locations, the before and after. So the after, of course, the arrow pointing down to the location of the pool on the right, and on the left, the pre-situation no pool, but behind the tree. We see the tree in both cases in the foreground. And then just slightly over the solid red line indicating the before the cedars were planted and the location of the cedars since. Another image of the cedars also gives you an idea of the extent of the municipal right-of-way from center line, graveled portion of the road, but as well the non-traveled portion of the road, the extent of the right-of-way leading to the north property line of property. We'll talk about the obvious, the proximity to the County Road 36. I think that's quite important in this case. Certainly, I think we can all recognize that accidents are difficult to predict, perhaps not impossible, but a challenge. Under ideal circumstances, the regular use of the right-of-way wouldn't impact residential uses on private properties adjacent to them, in my opinion. There is no guardrail within the County Road 36 right-of-way at this location, certainly. So since the trees offer limited protection, and I say trees, I'm referring to the cedars, to matters like debris, other materials. Here I would be referring to things like snow, salt, gravel, litter. I'm recommending that a fence be constructed as part of the approval of this minor variance, should the committee decide to go that route. We've incorporated that as condition number 2, and that would also be in keeping with like scenarios in other locations along the County Road 36 right-of-way. We'll move to the zoning bylaw for a moment, and recognizing that the zone in this location is general rule in the Verulam Township zoning bylaw, that's A1. Of course, there to set and establish character and maintain the character. But important to recognize that the zoning provisions, it's a 1987 zoning bylaw, they don't necessarily translate well across every single development scenario, lotting pattern, or when there are varied road configurations to consider. Another opportunity to look at improvements when consolidating multiple zoning bylaws into what we're currently engaging in, and that's the updated comprehensive rural zoning bylaw for a consistent approach to zoning provisions across our rural areas. So this is an agricultural lot. It is undersized, and it does contain residential uses. So these are all factors that contribute to how well or not the structures and buildings comply with the provisions. The increased coverage will start there with the addition to the home, 2.77%. In my opinion, that's a modest increase. Like residential lots in other areas, we're looking at an increase up to 33%, of course, with different servicing requirements. But we do see increases over the 10% maximum coverage, which is the case here. Even with that increase in coverage, the impact is negligible, if any at all, in terms of how the lot functions, drainage and impacts to landscaping, which there would be none. We talked a little bit about the logical or practical location of the pool and the proposed decking when looking at the function of the other yards, and we'll just maybe zone in on those for a point of reference. Okay, so the pool, of course, is considered an accessory structure according to the zoning bylaw. It is required to be in an interior side or rear yard only, not the front or exterior, which it is located in currently. Now, these aren't practical options. We can see the configuration of the property itself, and understanding that although deemed to be an exterior yard, that land behind the home does function like a rear yard. All right, and setbacks. We'll move to our evaluation of the setbacks, not only from the center line of the municipal roads, but also from the lot lines themselves. Centerline setbacks do vary depending on the road classification. In the case of a county road, they're slightly larger than they are for local roads, and that's why we see that discrepancy between a 15-meter setback versus a 10-meter setback between County Road 36 and Odessa Road. Committee has been privy to this rationale in the past, and I will repeat it. It is sound, and approaching the centerline setbacks, we understand the zoning bylaw to be written on the premise that should a road allowance be of a non-standard width for its classification, that built form would be adequately set back from it if the municipality decided that a road widening was warranted. The adjacent segments of County Road 36 and Odessa Road in this case are not deficient. Widenings aren't required. I'll note also, and we're on this slide, so it's useful, the existing structures, the carport, the residential deck, the shed, they also encroach into their respective yards. Similar setbacks, and in my opinion, have demonstrated compatibility with the surrounding uses. And very briefly, with respect to the rural land use designation in the official plan, low-density residential uses and accessory structures are contemplated, are permitted, and that brings us compliance with test number 4. I'll take a minute just to turn our focus to the transportation policies in the official plan. Unlike the zoning bylaw that has a 30-meter right-of-way expectation for a county road, the official plan policies actually look to a 26-meter right-of-way. That would translate to about 13 meters on either side of the center line, and that would actually buy, in some ways, a 2-meter excess is one way of looking at it. In other words, it's a 2-meter less of a deficiency, bringing that setback from 20.3. 18.3 is what is being sought. If we were solely relying on direction from the OP, we would be at the 20.3 mark, a slightly less deficient setback. But again, unlike its companion provision in the zoning bylaw, and the zoning is applicable law when it comes to building permit issuance, so that is what we focus on. All right, and I will complete my evaluation and my recommendation, Mr. Chair, by letting you know that the owners, when the issue was presented to them about the deficient yard and setbacks of the pool, the existing structure, they had taken time to consider what resiting the pool could look like to them. Given the site constraints that we talked about today, given the potential compromising of the structural integrity and sturdiness of the above-ground pool structure, and certainly the costs involved, not necessarily just with disassembling and reassembling the pool, but by buying replacement parts. They were advised that that was likely, that was out of reach. And so although an alternative was considered, the path to minor variance was the one that was chosen. So based on our evaluation of the existing scenario, what is proposed, and our evaluation of the 4 tests, as well as not having received any concerns or objections from the agencies, from the circulated members of the public, Mr. Chair, I recommend approval of this variance.
Thank you very much, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions, Mr. Strangway?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berry, with regard to the fence, are you proposing a fence all the way around the swimming pool or just on the length of County Road 36? I'm just not clear on what you're proposing.
Mr. Chair, through you, thank you for the question, Mr. Strangway. The option is available to the owners. Certainly at a minimum, my recommendation would be that it covers the extent of the pool structure. My preference would be to see the fencing along the entirety of the lot line. This isn't dictated a necessity in the companion bylaw that dictates fencing. So I would ask one question of our chief building official, should she be available, just to see if there's any additional fencing notations in any applicable law that we could ask, and if so, if it's the desire of the committee, we could further characterize or qualify the condition if that's reasonable.
Follow up?
Through the chair, The fence bylaw itself that deals with just fencing for the municipality is a document that just outlines restrictions as to height, location, those type of items. It doesn't give any requirements for mandatory locations for fences. The pool bylaw, its fencing criteria just requires the fence to be protected. So it is interpreted that if the deck itself has a guard around the entire pool that can act as a fence, or the wall of the pool is such that it can act as a fence, that the minimum in that pool bylaw is a 4-foot barrier. So as long as the barrier is created through that structure, that satisfies the pool bylaw. So outside of that, there is no other requirements that could be enforced to dictate how this fence looks.
Thank you, Ms. Murchison.
Thank you to both of you for that. I was a little surprised. I guess I was thinking that being a pool, it had to have some sort of fence around it. Thank you.
Mr. Marks, did I see your hand?
Yeah, and that was the same concern I had. So just to be clear on it, if they have the deck, as long as they meet the bylaw just says it has to be protected, as the chief building official just said. So number 2, the condition that's in there is the planner on the same page as the building inspector. I guess that's where I'm at. Is the building department and the planning department in agreement at the definition of the sections regarding fencing?
Ms. Berry?
Mr. Chair, the sections referenced in the condition relate just to the zoning bylaw provisions for fencing. And our chief building official has referenced a couple of other pieces that aren't noted in the conditions, but certainly apply as part of completing permits regarding any further construction around the pool, so the decking. Is this perhaps a case of fencing required around the pool versus fencing along a lot line as a additional barrier? If we take a look at some imagery here, maybe that one is helpful. Sort of containing the trees on the, for example, interior of the lot. That was the intention of condition 2, as opposed to underscore the importance of the pool fencing.
Up to Ms. Berry. So there's no bylaws though that exist in the city that say you have to fence along a county road or a municipal road. So why, I don't understand what the necessity is of the condition, other than aesthetics. So I'm just looking for clarification, I guess, what your expectations are and why we'd put that condition in when it's not required by the city.
Ms. Berry?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. And aesthetics, I can appreciate the comment. I suppose beauty is in the eye of the beholder. This would functionally serve 2 purposes, and I agree with you. It's not a requirement, unless, of course, imposed as a condition. The idea being to both protect the property from any sort of activity, typical activity in the roadway, given the decking would bring the use around the pool a little closer to the lot line and therefore a little closer to the municipal road allowance than what we see with the existing pool. So just normal debris and materials that are leaving the right-of-way and entering the yard being projected, for example, into the air, that the fence would perhaps serve the purpose of eliminating some of that excess from entering the property.
So was the applicant agreeable to that?
They were, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for that follow-up question. They had intended already, they hadn't sorted out the style or nature of the fence, but my understanding in speaking with them is that they had intended to put up a fence for privacy reasons as well.
That's what I was thinking, maybe a privacy issue. But if they're agreeable, I don't think there should be an issue with that. Any further questions of the planner? Ms.
Sure, it's a fair one for the planner, but the trees, the fence would have to go on the roadside of the trees. Is there sufficient space to put a fence there and still be on their property? Quite often people put trees right on the lot line.
Mr. Chair, through you, my eyesight is not what it used to be. I'm actually going to look at my appendix for a closer image of what is on the slide at the moment. No, it's very light, is it? The trees are indicated on the interior of the lot, so effectively the fence could be located on or just within the actual lot line itself.
Okay, anything further of the planner? Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? I see.
Chair, it's actually, I am the applicant for this file, as this was something that arose through something that was missed at the pool permit issuance stage. So we have taken it to the committee on behalf of the actual property owner. So I can answer whatever questions I have the ability to, and otherwise I might have to defer to the owners.
Are there any questions of the, yes, Ms. Archer?
Through you, please, to Ms. Murchison. I'm a little bit confused here, but am I understanding it properly that this pool was put in 2020 with the blessing of the building department, and now we've decided it's too close?
Through the chair, it was actually a pool permit, not a building permit. It's under the pool bylaw. And you're correct, we issued a pool permit for the installation. And at the time that pool permit was issued, it was missed that this was an exterior side yard that the pool was being placed in. So that was just a staff error, and that's why we're assisting this property owner in making the correction now.
Well, my problem then with that is if they're having to fix our mess, and they're going to quite an expense to put up this fence, which I don't believe is really necessary. I understand to fence a pool so nobody drowns, but just so you don't get a paper bag in the face from a car going by seems like a lot of expense. Just my opinion.
All right, I'll ask Ms. Murchison. She's representing the applicant. We've heard from Ms. Berry that the applicant has agreed with erecting this fence. Do you have any issues with it?
Through the chair, I don't really have an opinion on the fence itself because, like Ms. Berry said, it was she that had the conversation with the property owner. I haven't discussed the fence with them.
All right. Is the applicant online? You said that we could. Is the actual applicant here listening? No.
I don't believe so.
Well, we'll leave it up to the committee, but as Ms. Berry has indicated, she has discussed it with them and they're content to do that. So, but it's up to the committee. All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Mr. Marsh.
Move that it be adopted with the exception of condition number 2.
I have a seconder, Ms. Archer. All right. You want to speak to that,
Just
Mr. Marsh?
speaking to it quickly, we've got bylaws in place. If the people want to put a fence up, they can. But what was mentioned by the committee here, it was the municipality, the city sort of messed it up in the first place. And that could be a very, very expensive condition, and it's not required. I don't think it's really fair. If they want to put a fence up, they can put a fence up. But as long as the pool's safe and it complies to all our bylaws, that's all we should be looking at.
Ms. Archer, do you wish to speak to it?
In agreement with that.
Are there any further comments or questions from committee members? All right. Here we go. Mr. Marsh. Ms. Archer. All right. Ms. Richardson.
Favor.
Mr. Strangway.
In favor.
Ms. Robinson. And I'm in favor. The motion carries. Application approved. Now, moving right along, I believe that the illustrious Mr. Harding has a few comments for us. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not too much else to add, really. I got it out of the way in the beginning. It's been wonderful interacting with all of you over the years, and I've definitely learned a lot and developed so much as a person, not just as a professional planner, but as an individual as well. And I do thank you so much for your patience as I was learning the ropes in the planning profession. It's really gone so far with me to just develop who I am today, and I'm so appreciative of that. So thank you so much.
Well, I'll say, as the chair of the committee, you're probably one of the most thorough and articulate planners that I've been exposed to, and I say that most sincerely. And you'll be sorely missed, David. So, but we do, and I'm sure the committee may have some comments, but we wish you every success in any future endeavors. And again, thank you for your efforts over the years, and very, very much appreciated. Committee, any further comments? Yes, Mr. Strangway.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, David, it's been a pleasure to work with you and a very exciting time for you. I wish you all the very best. And I thank you what you did for the city of Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Berry, did you wish to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How do I follow that? We certainly, I think it's a mutual sort of reciprocal learning that's taken place. I've worked with David closely now just for the past year, although I've been with the city for nearly 5, but have enjoyed it immensely, and again, have learned from him. He says he's learned from me. We'll see what he takes of that to Vaughan with him. But both he and also our recently resigned partner in crime on the Committee of Adjustment, powerhouse of planning, Mr. Staten. So with both resignations, those are some awfully big shoes to fill. And actually on the call with us today on Zoom, we have 2 of our staff planners, Planner 1s. We've got Catherine Evans and Megan Peck. And we had invited them. They do make an effort to watch the Committee of Adjustment meetings to understand what the background work that they do in their capacity as Planner 1s does to help support the work of the Planner 2s, especially as it relates to the Committee of Adjustment work, with either the research or the zoning compliances, addressing the inquiries, and giving potential applicants advice on what their next steps would be to proceed with their development proposals, which very often led to background that was given and discussed then with Mr. Harding and Mr. Staten. And so under David's tutelage and mentorship for Catherine Evans, that's been going on 2 years very soon in May. Oh boy. Yes, in May. And with Megan, at the end of June, it'll be a year that she's been part of the planning division and contribute to the team. And so, David, you're leaving us. Certainly Vaughan's gain is a loss for us, but have set us up quite well with some good potential to move relatively seamlessly with our future Committee of Adjustment meetings. I know I will be leaning on our planning group, and that includes Mark over there to your right and Charlotte in the wings, watching remotely and taking minutes. We work well as a team, and we will rely on each other to help move things forward, because we do recognize that there is a lot of interest, development activity and interest in the city. No shortage of minor variance applications that you see in front of your committee every month, and that we know are waiting in the queue to become processed and end up in front of you in subsequent months. And we are going to do our very best to keep in step with the pace that David and Kent have set. We will see a fairly lighter agenda for next month, but there will be an agenda nonetheless. So David, I again thank you, not just for your contributions to this committee and to the city, but certainly to me as well, and helping set the scene for overseeing this work.
And that was my concern when I guess the bottom dropped out, and we heard both planners were leaving. My concern was, and I have discussed it with Ms. Berry, about where do we go from here, because I'm sure every committee member here and staff are aware of the fact that there have been comments in the past, and especially Mr. Strangway and myself and Mr. Marsh being former councillors, that things were always seemed to be delayed in the city of Kawartha Lakes, and you couldn't move along very quickly, and there was always delays, and so that was my concern when I heard this. How are we? Is there going to be a seamless transition? And Ms. Berry, thank you very much, because just from what we've heard from you, it looks like we will be moving along. So that's good news. Yeah. So yeah, no pressure, no pressure. But
Mr. Chair and Member Marsh, it builds character, right? And we're all very, very well and familiar with that. Mm-hmm.
But my experience over the years has been that our staff always seem to carry us through, so and they do. So I'm sure this situation will be no different, and I thank everyone for that. So David, again, we wish you the very best and safe journey.
Thank you so much.
Further under other business from anyone? Yes, Ms. Archer. Have you had the course, Dave? Commendation. Yeah. We would never give up on you. You're too valuable. Yeah. Well, accolades to you, Ms. Archer, for your efforts. All right, nothing further from staff or committee members? Then I need a motion to adjourn. Okay, Mr. Marsh and Ms. Robinson. I'm not even going to ask for who's who here. We'll just say all in favor. Thank you. Ms. Richardson, are you going to be with us next time, or what's going on?
I'm hoping to. I just have a cold, and I didn't think you would appreciate me being in attendance.
Oh, didn't know that. So, well, we wish you a speedy recovery then, for sure.
Thank
and
you.
We hope to see you next month then. Thanks, Sandra. I appreciate that. All right. All the best, everyone.